I'm Gary Peluso-Verdend. I think I've met nearly each of you sometime during the last few years that I've been offering these online courses at the intersection of religion, politics, and culture. And I wanted to offer this particular course, one from many.
Am I here finally?
Yes, I hear a voice, so therefore you must be here. I wanted to offer this course for several reasons. As some of you may have read in things that I've written previously, the question of really what is the nature of the community we seek, whether that we refers to the church or that we refers to the nation, has been a long-standing question of mine. In fact, it was the guiding question I used as I wrote my doctoral dissertation and defended it back in 1991. So it's been with me a while. I've also had the opportunity really first when I was dean of the seminary back in the late 1990s, and then for the 9 years I was president, to, in a very practical sense, try to work out what is the nature of the community of the community that is Phillips Theological Seminary. What is the nature of that? Communities are not perfectible. They're not term papers that you can expect to make sure that you have eliminated all of the syntactical, grammatical, and spelling and typo errors, because communities are full of people and none of us are perfectible. So on the one hand, no community can be perfect. On the other hand, communities can often be stretched to do and be more than we think they can be upon first blush. So the fact that sin or brokenness is a part of every community is a fact, while it's also not the necessarily the major limiting factor in it. One from many is an interesting phrase. As we know, it is derived from the Latin e pluribus unum, and some of the founders of the country, when they were put in charge of a committee to come up with a national seal, and they had various mottos they tried. They put everything on. They were trying everything from Moses parting the Red Sea to the children of Israel at an oasis in the wilderness. That was Jefferson's, the parting the Red Sea, and all the Pharaoh and all his men, the British were drowning. That was Franklin's. But the phrase e pluribus unum had first been used in a magazine called the Gentleman's Magazine, and they liked it as the first national motto because they had these colonies that had now become states that were in essence like 13 different nations. It was not a oneness amongst them. They were extraordinarily suspicious of all things federal. For many of them, they wanted to maximize the power that was left with the states and minimize the power that could be delegated to the federal system. But the founders knew, as anybody who's ever tried to lead any kind of community knows, you got to have some kind of glue. You have to have some kind of cement. You have to have some sort of binder. If you try to make a cake without any sort of protein binder or water or other liquid to hold that flour together, what are you going to have? Grumbles. Or an incredibly dry cake that falls apart easily. So you need something to hold it together. What is that something? And one can argue we've always struggled as a nation to find out what that something is. Our manyness is evident. Our oneness is more fleeting. And there have been many proposals for what that oneness means, none of which holds over the long time yet. And so I decided, this is a at this point in time in our nation's history, with representative democracy or Republican democracy, however you want to define what kind of democracy the U.S. is, or what kind of republic we are. It's being challenged in numerous parts of the world, including in some places that for at least a while had some democracy. And certainly what we've seen is, for instance, the president of China challenging the entirety of the Western world, saying in a world that changes as fast as this world changes, in a world driven so much by technology, and increasingly that technology, including artificial intelligence, which doesn't necessarily think better, but it sure thinks faster than most of us can think, especially as there's more snow on the mountaintop. The president of China is saying democracy is way too slow to respond to this world. Centralized authority is the only way that timely decisions can be made within the world now. So democracy is being challenged from without. It's clear that democracy is being challenged from within. I don't know about you, but it's only been in the last few years that I've ever heard the term illiberal democracy. I've heard the term liberal democracy for a long time. And by that, liberal doesn't mean politically liberal in the kind of right and left, liberal and conservative sense, but liberal democracy meaning what we thought we were as the United States, which is each person's vote matters, that popular vote is somehow represented in the legislation that is passed, that there is, while the majority does rule, the rights of political minorities are always safeguarded, because you know that while you're in the political majority to get today, there's no such thing as a permanent majority, at least in the way we talk about liberal democracy. Illiberal democracy, such as Viktor Orban is perfecting in Hungary, and a number of American politicians and media personalities have gone over there and have learned more from Orban and invited him over here to speak. Illiberal democracy, which is what Orban calls it, is it's a one-party rule. It is majoritarian. Political minorities do not have rights. And for Orban, it is a Christian country. So that Christianity gets aligned with and kind of merged in with a political party, and the sort of the cultural power of religion and the political power of the state are once again merged together to defend something called traditional values, Christian civilization, and all kinds of other terms that are given to it. So I thought that this one from many, I'd love to see a revival of it. I just we just took a couple of day camping trip in our vintage 2000 Lazy Days RV, a couple of places in Missouri that we stayed one night each, kind of scoping them out. And as you drive through parts of rural Missouri, you see lots of "In God We Trust" signs. I never seen "E Pluribus Unum" sign or "Out of Many One." So that motto that was first introduced, "In God We Trust," during the Civil War, when preachers in the South had already convinced the South to put God in the Constitution, which the Confederacy had God in their Constitution. In the North, there were a whole lot of preachers who were convinced that it was a mistake not to put God in the Constitution, and were importuning Lincoln that if you really want to win this war, you better put God where God belongs, in the Constitution. And so Lincoln, through his Treasury Secretary, had "In God We Trust" put on coinage, in particular the 2-cent piece, which I think is great, and sort of representative of the way Lincoln sometimes played tongue in cheek with his opponents. Remember, Lincoln's the one who told the preachers who were always telling him what God's will was regarding this war, and slavery, that he said, you would think that since I'm the one who has to make decisions about this, God might actually say something to me rather than to you. So it was on coinage. Then it became our official national motto in the 1950s, as a result of the push at the time to differentiate godless communism from godly America. And unfortunately, what has happened now is, since godless communism has now become Christian Orthodox Russia, and America has, like many European countries, secularized, nowhere nearly like European countries have to the extent, but still we are. And the recent Pew study shows pretty clearly that in the next somewhere between 30 and 50 years, America will no longer be a majority Christian of any sort, unless trends change, and they do change. So now "In God We Trust" is being used as a sword to divide within the nation rather than between this nation and other nations. For me, that's a debate which feels counterproductive. Clearly, as we've become, especially since 1965, such an incredibly diverse ethnically nation, and incredibly diverse nation religiously, we've always had nearly incomprehensible diversity geographically. And the peoples, if you include the hundreds of indigenous civilizations, along with, as Colin Woodard says in the link I gave you, the 11 founding nations that moved in here from various European origins, we have tremendous manyness. Question is, can we get some oneness? And can we have enough oneness to do what we need to do as a people, to be the kind of nation that is aspirational, that is a place that, for those of us at least who believe more in the Emma Lazarus poem at the Statue of Liberty, and then for those who said this nation was founded for white Christians, and that's the people who ought to rule. There are many other variations of those, but those are two in conflict today, rather severe conflict, in fact. So I thought a class for people that probably have at least a faith background, if not themselves practitioners at the moment, who also care about this nation as an ethical and moral construction, in addition to being a political construction, that you might want to share. There might be some people out there who want to share with me the learning around and the discussion around what does one from many possibly mean today. So in this first lecture, I talked a little bit about why we might need oneness, why we might need manyness, what some of the counterfeits of oneness and manyness are. Next week, we're going to look at the primary metaphors that have been used over time, but especially in the last 100 years or so, of how we talk about the one and the many, followed by then a look at what are the resources we have and the obstacles to creating a one for many society, and concluding with what we might learn from the century plus of the modern ecumenical movement, as these churches representing peoples who once fought and killed each other up to a third of the population of Europe in the 16th century. And here in America have at least bought into enough of that First Amendment, which again, John Courtney Murray, the Jesuit, calls an article of peace rather than article of faith, a way we might be able to live in the same space without deciding that we need to kill each other, or in order to have purity and the like. So we'll go through these 4 weeks, and what I tried to discover and read, I want to emphasize for you. These are somewhat studied, yes, but they're opinions. I have numerous opinions on these matters. I think you probably have some opinions on these matters too, and I'm really interested in hearing your opinions. So right now, I'm going to stop talking, and other than to say that Kirk Gwartney, the Senior Director of Communications at the seminary, has been my partner in pulling off these courses in recording my speaking and pairing up slides with the lectures. And I'm very grateful to Kurt for doing that. And in most of these courses, Kurt has also been able to help observe and moderate discussion some to let me know whose hand is up and what the cue is and the like. So if you're, I very much, first, thank you, Kurt, who's on screen, and I'm very much interested in hearing from you. What did you hear in this first lecture, in this first set of ideas that you want to make some response to?
And I'd invite you to unmute yourself before you, because I think everybody's muted at this point.
Yep.
And then you can also put stuff in chat if you'd like, and I'll share that along the way, or Gary will.
Yep.
Well, you guys can always count on me to start off the conversation, can't you?
Hey, Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Skye. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. So, guys, how do you have one when it's so easy for you to kill the people who don't agree with you or have something you want? How are you going to get enough trust in the silent, maybe not silent, minority? How do you manage that? As the minority becomes a majority, then what happens to the former majority? So if you have the power to kill at will, it's kind of hard to say that you're just kumbaya best friends, isn't it?
Okay, so help me a little bit here. So to whom are you speaking with that statement?
To powers that be and the authority and the legitimate authority that has been in this country for 400 years.
And some of the killing you refer to would be?
members of the police state, members of the Black community, members of the LGBTQ community, members of the Indigenous, members of the Hispanic, and members of the white class that disagreed with the ruling class. So take your pick. I think it's a pretty good smorgasbord of people who've been killed for believing in what this course is about.
Mm-hmm. Right. For whom does America exist, and does do the values of freedom and equality and the like apply equally across all people, or are there some more free than others?
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
Yep.
Fair way to state it?
Yep.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned in all of that is, of course, violence done by one group against another, or by one kind of authority versus others. And of course, every nation has something of that in their history, and every nation needs to deal with. So how do you rectify? How do you deal with? How do you atone for? How do you make reparations or repairs of what's been broken in the past? That still may be breaking, but the issue that you raise with all of that, Julie, that is one of the chief ones in front of us today, is definitely the issue of trust, and maybe what's part of what's happened in recent years is that those whose trust have been broken, but they've not had a platform, they've been more or less silenced or silent, now have multiple platforms in order to put out the message that no, the way you're talking about history is not the whole history. It doesn't include the history of the nations dealing with us, and now we are not going to remain silent anymore about that. And please don't assume that trust in all of the authoritative institutions is uniform in the society. Yeah. Others either on the top, on Julie's question, or who have a statement they'd like to have us discuss. Now, shyness is not permitted here.
Gary,
Yes.
Richard Neal.
Hi, Richard.
I agree with that statement, but I also think we need to incorporate the feeling of fear. I think a lot of this is fear-based, on fear of losing something. And I think that something varies greatly from group to group. But I don't think we can discount that fear.
I agree that there's a lot of fear here. And from your perspective, Richard, what are some of those fears?
Well, I think as we see ourselves as a predominantly white Christian nation, I don't think we are any longer predominantly white or predominantly Christian. And I think as certain people are seeing that slip away, they are worried and fearful that they're going to lose their belief system, and it's going to be taken away from them in many ways.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about that for me is nobody's going after, I mean, I don't think yet, nobody's going after what any particular religion teaches within that faith group. I mean, it's more what people do that I think is where the rub is. Would like to part of our history, of course, and that's been very enlivened and more open wounded recently in the Dodd's decision overcoming Roe v. Wade. The pushback really is that the historians talk about Roe is actually connected to the movement of fundamentalist white Christianity from, like Jerry Falwell used to preached against Martin Luther King taking religion to the streets, and preached this sermon back in like 1963 about how preachers need to stay in their pulpits, preach more of evangelical sermons and pray more, but kind of stay in those buildings. And then Falwell, of course, becomes the head of the moral majority sometime later. Well, what kind of brought that out? Well, one of the key events in all of that is when the IRS, after the Brown v. Board of Education decision, the IRS told Bob Jones University that had a racially discriminatory admissions policy that racism is not charitable, therefore we are revoking your 501c3 status. That brought a lot of fundamentalists into public life saying, you are threatening our education, you are threatening our families, but they couldn't get real good traction around schools other than in the South, where a lot of these schools, the school districts in the South, the white student body emptied out of the public schools, and the segregation academies, so-called, sprung up all over Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and the like. But they really couldn't get a political movement started out of all of that. And it really wasn't until the middle 1970s, after, and kind of in the aftermath of the Roe decision, when even people like Hubert Humphrey said, there's more abortions happening than I thought were going to happen. And the Catholic Church and the evangelicals, who used to be couldn't stand each other, now came together in that political movement and said, what could ignite a national movement of Christian conservatives who were fearful of government overreach into the schools and the family? What could really unite them? Well, what about abortion is what they decided. That was what kind of got them into it. It was fear. It was fear that really drove that. So yes, fear is a powerful motivator. Absolutely, these days.
And certainly fearful people are dangerous people, because I think fear and anger are tied together. And that brings up the issue, I think, of the ubiquity of firearms and the extraordinarily lax laws on the control of firearms, perhaps as a result of being on the side of the many, rather than the interest of the entire community in having some protection from violence. And I think that has a tremendous chilling effect on people in a democracy.
Yes, I mean, the fact that we have, well, I know these are always estimates, right? Because nobody's allowed to keep a database, or nobody has been allowed to keep a database, I think, of all the guns in the country, but the estimate is in the vicinity of 400 million. So more guns than we have people, and those, of course, aren't all that isn't spread evenly throughout the country. But look at the guns, when Barack Obama became president, there was a huge spike in gun sales. Every time a Democrat is elected president, regardless of whether that Democrat says, this is not about hunters. This is not about a gun in your home for self-protection. This is about assault rifles. This is about keeping our children safe and the like. It doesn't fly. Yes, and Debbie's put in the chat, yes, fear does motivate many people to do things that help them feel powerful. Sadly, that can make more people feel fear. I mean, I don't want to pick on guns, and I'm not. I mean, I'm just speaking personally. Well, I think from the way I understand the Second Amendment, that well-trained militia phrase really should be paid attention to more than it has been, even including by the courts. That's just an opinion. If I have this big gun, now I'm fearful if you get this big gun, so I have to have a bigger gun for this bigger gun, or a gun that shoots, but that's again the semi-automatic versus just a one pull trigger. It creates a whole different dynamic, and I just can't imagine that society where every churchgoer has a gun on their person, where every college classroom could possibly, you get into a heated discussion, but everybody's got a gun on them, and where certain trained individuals, and frankly speaking, my daughter-in-law included, who teaches in a public school in Indiana, who's got quite a bit of firearms training, she'd love to be able to carry in the classroom. That scares me in a way that I don't like. So, Sue, you have your hand up. Sue, did you want to speak? You're on mute right now, so go ahead. There you go.
Yes, I had to find how to unmute. Sorry. It's my first time in one of your groups, Gary, so thank you for having me. I read the 2 reviews of books that were in the reading list, and I found the Graeber article to be quite interesting because we're talking democracy tonight, and
Sue, is everybody's audio on Sue breaking up at this point? Yes, we're having head nods. So, how about Sue? How about if you? How about Sue? Maybe the connection would help. If could you turn your video off for a moment and just have your audio, and let's see how that works, because otherwise we were only hearing part of what you were saying.
Okay, how's the volume now? Not good?
It's much better.
Oh, okay. Graeber's, the article about Graeber defines civilization as mutual aid, social cooperation, civic activism, hospitality, and caring for others. And I'm not sure we're doing a good job of being a civilized America on several of those points. But I want to throw in a little something that I saw on NPR this evening. Melinda French Gates was Judy Waters' guest. Judy Woodruff, I'm sorry. And when she was asked, what do you think would help this situation in our country? She said, we need to have more women in office. So I think this group is probably a little more male than female, but I'd like to hear some discussion on that. Could that be not an antidote to the direction that we're turning, but could that modify the the course that we're following right now.
Thanks for asking the question. And I'm going to just say a word, and I want to, I'd love to get others' responses to it. So for these classes, each of these classes I've taught about, it's been about 2/3 women actually signing up for those classes. So the group chat, I'm not sure what our mix is of male and female tonight, but it's usually pretty at least 50% women. I certainly have heard for years that we need to elect more of the people we don't have, and then and I happen to agree with that. And at the same time, there's been immediate criticism that came out from in regard to the new British Prime Minister, who's a woman and highly conservative, and she appointed a cabinet that has no white men in it. But some in Britain are saying, but it's the wrong kind of diversity, because every single one of them is an arch conservative who came out of an elite school and is going to benefit by the kind of oligarchy which is there. So it's a very interesting time we live in. But I'm real curious what did you think about Sue's comment in regard to the people we elect, the people who serve in office, and whether more women in office would change the offices, would change the way our society is moving. Yeah, Jim McCann.
Yeah, if I may, I hope I can be heard well by everyone, but I will tell you that ever since the Justice Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings in 1991, I decided, given an option of voting between a male and a female, that I was no longer going to decide strictly on the basis of their platforms and what they say, because frankly, I don't think you can believe a lot of what they say. I started contributing to Emily's List, which many of you may know of, that is a big organization that supports the election of women. And I have consistently, where there's a choice on the deal, and I will say most of the choices have been in the political party that I favor when it comes to women. So I have no problem supporting those. And only rarely have I had an occasion where the two choices, both Republican and Democrat, are both women. That doesn't happen very much. Have I struggled with it a bit more? I frankly think the white male ego, the white male belief historically that from the founding of this country that, the Christian white male is supposed to be the leader and talker of everything, is now a totally, in my opinion, defunct theory or position for anybody to take. And the more women we have in office, frankly, the less testosterone there'll be in the Congress. And that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
What about the church? I've often thought if the church from the beginning was more matriarchal than patriarchal, we'd be a whole lot better followers of Christ than we are. The Oklahoman had a full-page ad that was from atheists, and they're pointing out that today the nuns with an S, N-U-N-E-S, are outnumbering those who claim to have a religion.
Yeah, and right, Ray, and as you as a pastor well know, and at the same time, when you ask, so who does the majority of programmatic work around religious congregations for 2 centuries? at least in America, it's been women. I mean, there's a pretty famous book on American religious history. I think it's called The Feminization of American Christianity or something like that. That's on this point. Yeah, and somebody did put in the chat. I was also, I guess it was Richard in there. Yes, then you have the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Laura Boeberts and the Sarah Palins and the like, and but those I don't think are the women that most of us are talking about, as we'd like to see more of in office.
It certainly wasn't the ones that I was referring to.
Yeah, right. They're not Emily. They wouldn't be promoted by Emily's list, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, something that's bothered me for a long time is, and it goes pre-internet. You can go watch Hotel Rwanda and get this awful drumbeat of fear mongering. You know, pre-Hitler, once you had mass media, I'm not sure what you do to turn the temperature down. It's too profitable to be just, you know, yeah, you can spread good news, but you can spread so much fear so easily. I, for one, have had to learn to turn stuff off a lot more than I ever thought I would. Is there anything besides personal choice to be done about that?
Well, I certainly know that a whole lot of the country shares that concern that you have, including some people that I think matter in terms of policy and direction and the like. A piece that I don't know, I mean, Alan, kind of to your point, a piece that I don't know how to accomplish, but for those of us who live in Oklahoma, we're just really an example of what I'm going to talk about. Our sense of public is extraordinarily thin. We've sell off what are the public airwaves I mean, who owns the biggest platforms for talking to one another today? It's private companies. And when we're debating about Facebook, Twitter, or any of the other social media platforms, and about free speech on them and the like, they're private companies. Free speech does not apply the same way to a private company that it applies to anything that is of the government, whether that be state government or federal government. I think that and this is one of my hopes, is that eventually, for those of us who consider ourselves people of faith, that we can see ourselves more as people who are called to weave a richer fabric into our public life, into the publics around us, and I would love to say that we could also contribute to fostering candidates for office who share that belief that that public ought to be a robust term, not necessarily that which is should always give way to individual corporations and others who will thin out or commercialize what the public was. So I think for me, that goes along with why can there be so many channels today? Well, part of the reason definitely is the technology, yes, but the other part of it is we sell them off. we as a people have, our legislators have sold them off.
And as the recovering journalist in the group,
Good.
I'd say, speech has always, the commercial nature of speech in this country has always been with us. You used to have your Republican newspaper and your Democratic newspaper, in your town, often the morning paper, the evening paper, and they switch back and forth. Even talking about the Tulsa Race Massacre, you had the World and the Tribune, with one not flaming, the other pretty much calling for it to happen. And so I think it's been a long part of our history. But I do think, and I remember learning this even in journalism school way back in the olden days, was that where we have ended up is, it used to be when you walked into the grocery store growing up, there would be a news rack that would have magazines of, there'd be like 3 train enthusiast magazines or more, and there'd be 5, this kind. So basically, we've done the magnazinification of our media, so that, if you're a train enthusiast that only likes Lionel, H.O. Gage, produces smoke, engines in your train set, there's an online place for you to go to do that. And the cultural, what I learned at Phillips, culture is a shared set of basic assumptions. And where do we have shared sets of basic assumptions anymore? Which it's a real downer. But it's difficult when you talk about media in particular, and having been, working in media pretty since I was a kid. The way that has splintered and the way it has separated, and that you don't have to hear anything that you don't agree with anymore, makes it a real challenge to be one from many. Makes it much easier to be many from one.
Right. Or even the many exploiting the one. Right. That goes to the public thing again. They're to have any sense of oneness, there has to be a sense of being a public together. We're just about at 8:00, and I know we started a few minutes late, but unfortunately, also not fortunately, I want to honor your time. Please, now I should ask, Kurt, do you know when the next lecture will be up and available?
Tomorrow afternoon.
Good. We'll let you know when that's up and available. And this one you should have some recognition of and enjoyment of, because you'll get to play with the metaphors of the bundle of arrows or sticks, and the mosaic and the melting pot, and the like, for what this country is, and why, by the way, the body of Christ, we're not everybody can be the hand, and not everybody could be the foot, and all. It didn't hold in the 16th century, and it's not what's going to hold today. So I hope you have enjoyment with it. Send me your texts and emails during the week. There's a robust chat feature on here, and I'm also going to generate either a poll or a question for you at all to have a go at, should you want to, on the Mighty side. So thanks so much for coming out tonight, and I hope to see you next week.